It was a really important discussion to start off today's event. So thank you all for participating, and thank you to our audience for being a part of this crucial conversation. I am Erin Sauter, I'm one of the co-founders of From Day One, and wanted to echo my partner Nick and my other founder, Steve Kep, and just thank you for joining us and for being part of this. With that being said, I'm really pleased to introduce our next speaker of today, another very important discussion. This discussion is entitled A Change from Within, Building a Roadmap for Future Talent. It will be presented by Mina Morris. Mina is an associate partner at Aon. So please join me in welcoming Mina Morris at Aon.
I'd like to start with a question. So who here in the room is doing a job today that's different to what their early education or early career was about? So if we can get a show of hands. Wow, okay. So about 50, 60% of the room. And that's not uncommon in today's world. We see people doing jobs which are completely different from where they started with their early career. And so what I'd like to talk to you today about is a focus on how we can get better at supporting people through this journey, and how we can help people better understand the career choices and trade-offs that they make as they go through their career journey. Now, one of the first things I do, and I do these things, is try to explain my accent, which is a little bit different. So I live and work in New York City, but my accent, as you may or may not be able to tell, is from New Zealand. So I grew up in New Zealand. My family immigrated there. They're actually from Egypt. So I had one early transition in my life. But then I've spent probably the last 20 years living and working outside of New Zealand. So actually the last 10 years before moving to New York, we're in Dubai, where I worked across the Middle East. And why this topic is actually really close to my heart is, as I thought about my family's transitions and my own transitions, none of it was really objective, none of it was planned. It was an opportunity that came, and I just grabbed the opportunity. But I start to think, how do people make decisions these days? And can they become a bit more objective about thinking about the trade-offs that they have? And also part of my accent is my wife is from the UK, so that's another really strange piece in the mix. So another question that I would like to ask, who here has children who are in their teenage years? Raise your hands. Okay, so a few people. For those people that have got kids that are, between 12 and 19, let's say, what do you think is their life expectancy today? So how long do you think they'll live for? Just yell out some numbers. 80? 100? 90? Okay. So we've got some really interesting data that says the life expectancy for 50% of kids that are born in 2007 is when this research was done. But kids born in this time period 50% of kids will live to be over 100 years old. And that's comparable to a lot of Western economies, comparable to, Japan is a bit of an outlier. But that tells us a really interesting piece around the model that we've used to think about in terms of study, work, retire, is no longer going to be, no longer going to be viable. People are going to make various transitions throughout their career. And this idea of retiring at a certain age is actually going to move. And the idea that people will study and their education will hold them, will add value to their lives throughout their careers is probably not going to be true. So that's one piece that we think about as we think about people are changing. The other really interesting piece is we hear a lot about AI, machine learning, new technologies that are coming in. And we hear lots of different statistics around what impact that is going to have. What we do know is there is a shortage of skills that we will need for the future. And some of this is around the tasks that are being predicted to be performed by things like AI. So we know that we're in the midst of a big change. Lots of executives are saying, and lots of senior leaders are saying, that they're going through a digital transformation of sorts, that they perhaps don't have the right talent in place. But at the same time, we see that AI is being is kind of going to create new types of jobs that we are going to need for the future. So we know that jobs are changing. The other really interesting piece is when we think about industries. I'm sure if you reflect on your own industries and the pace of change that you're seeing, we see that is going at an exponential rate. So, this is a really interesting piece of research which looks at how long did it take different industries to reach 50 million users. So if we think about airplanes or cars, it took 68 years, 62 years to reach 50 million people. Now we think about new technologies, Pokemon Go, for example, 19 days to reach 50 million users. So that's the magnitude of change that we're seeing. But what I actually find really interesting about this is actually Facebook, and I'm not sure if you can see it very clearly there, but it took Facebook 3 years to reach 50 million users. Now we think about Facebook as a new technology, as something that's part of our DNA now, social media. But actually, it took them 3 years to reach 50 million users, and that ratio is completely different compared to Pokemon Go. And within that, we see lots of companies are changing their business models. So this idea of you work for a company and they do one thing is actually, again, shifting quite rapidly. We've just pulled out 3 good examples there. Netflix, you may be aware, the revenue now is not actually coming just directly from subscriptions. They spend about 40% of their income on creating content to keep people engaged. So they're actually now turning into a bit of a movie production, show business type organization. Philip Morris, some of you might be familiar with the tobacco brand names. They are actually moving to a smoke-free business model. So they're actually shifting completely what they're about to turn it into something different. So again, think about the people working within those companies. Their jobs, their business model is changing very rapidly. And finally, another really cool example is BlackRock, so investment bank. We think of them as bankers making investment decisions. Actually, what they're doing is shifting to a subscription-based model based on a platform called Aladdin, which does basically AI for stock picking. So again, completely different business model, shifting how people do work. And I'm sure if you think about your own businesses, this would resonate. You're probably introducing new service lines, you're probably thinking about doing work in a different way. And this is what we see coming across different industries. So as we put all of this together, what does it all mean? It means we probably need new skills, new competencies as we think about the future. It probably means that we need to think about business strategies as something that are completely fluid. It's no longer viable to think about a 3-year or 5-year business plan. It's probably actually just in time in terms of how we think about businesses. That probably your motivation isn't just a paycheck. It's probably a combination of the lifestyle, the manager, the whole package that you'll get from a working experience. And that probably thinking about the leadership aspect of it, you need leaders to be able to guide you through different career decisions. So as we kind of think about this, and we think about talent and the type of people that you need for the future, we kind of find that organizations are thinking about it in one of 4 different ways. Either buying talent, so bringing in people to do specific jobs, renting talent, so the whole piece around the gig economy, getting people in to do a specific project, automating, so including things like robot, machine learning, things like that to basically change certain job functions, or thinking about it from a growth perspective. And the growth piece is really what's interesting in terms of growing people to be able to adjust to new roles, new demands, new competencies. And that's the piece that energizes us the most as we think about that journey that people go through. At Aon, we've done a lot of thinking around what does that journey look like. And there are different ways in which you can approach this and think about it for your own organizations. But one of the starting points that we think about is this idea of a job is no longer going to be a set of parameters that you think about. It's actually going to be this idea of a job neighborhood, which is different types of competencies needed to do similar types of work. And so we start to think about it from a journey and thinking about how do you start to define a combination of different jobs and what are the competencies and skills that you need to be able to do those jobs. We then think about it from a gaps perspective. Where are people today and where do you need them to be? And there's a lot of science that we can introduce to that part of the process to be able to assess where is everybody's head at today? What are their skills? What are their competencies? What are their attitudes? What drives them? And where do we need to get them to? And then the piece that kind of works for both the individual and the organization is thinking about that roadmap, thinking about the transitions that people need to think about as they define their development. Now, I often think about this as an equation, and if you think about it from people that are making those decisions for themselves, they're probably constantly thinking about trade-offs. And I mentioned I worked in Dubai. One of the things that was really interesting about working in Dubai was actually working with people from different countries. And so I'm similar to most people here. You kind of have two hats. You have your hat of kind of your job and your function, and then you also have your hat of managing people perhaps, or leading groups or teams. And at one point I had 8 people report to me that were from 8 different countries. And one thing I found that was consistent among everybody from different backgrounds is this idea around clarity. And it wasn't just clarity about where we're going or what our vision is or what our company's trying to do, but it was also this idea about small picture clarity, as I used to call it. So tell me what I need to do on a practical, from a practical perspective. Tell me what I need to do next Tuesday morning to be able to deliver to my objectives. So there's kind of this 2 elements to clarity, the kind of the big picture piece, but also the small picture piece. And as I think about change, and I think a lot of you think about change, you might kind of think about it from this perspective of, to be able to overcome that resistance to change, we really need to help people think about what is a practical step that they need to take, what is the overall vision that we're working back from, but what is it causing them to kind of see that dissatisfaction? And we can kind of throw some statistics and numbers up, but it's also about the journey that people need to think about for their own transitions. And as we put this together, we did some research on about 3,000 individuals that have been successfully part of a digital transformation journey. And we looked at what is common, what tends to predict what happens as people go through this digital journey. And we found 3 things came out really strongly from our data set. First is this idea of learnability. People that want to learn, seek new experiences, seek to improve. So this is a really strong competency for people that manage these transitions really successfully. The second piece was around agility, being flexible, adapting to different situations, having a little bit of resilience to be able to overcome certain challenges. And then the third piece is being curious, jumping into a situation and being open and flexible and malleable to what that situation is about. So those 3 competencies put together predicted what success looked like in a digital environment. And then we found some other business-related competencies that also seem to be really strong predictors, depending on the industry, depending on the setting, depending on where you are. So things like a coaching mindset, for example. A coaching mindset is around taking each experience and growing with it and helping others to grow with it. Business acumen, being able to understand why we're doing something and the business reasons behind it, that also came out as a strong predictor. So with this idea of having this model in place, what we start to do is to break that down into helping people understand how do they track against these competencies. So we use a combination of different psychometric tools to be able to get at that data, but really understanding an individual's drivers, personality, cognitive profile, to be able to work out the level of agility and the level of preferences across those dimensions. So what that helps us do is first work out where people are, but what's really interesting is actually we can work out where they sit against those different job neighborhoods. So this example here is marketing, but it tells you, okay, if you are wanting to explore a career in marketing, you're a good fit for that, you're 86% fit. How can you start to prepare to be able to go onto that journey? And what are some of the trade-offs and things that you can do? And some of this is linked to things like Udemy, Coursera, free resources that people can work through to be able to develop themselves to own their digital career. As we think about development as well, one piece that is really important for us is to think about development as not just depth. So a lot of our traditional, sort of education, learning, development focuses on people getting more skills in one domain. And we think about also development as not just getting that breadth, but also getting not getting just the depth, but the breadth. And the breadth in this case, for example, again, marketing, it might be about stakeholder management. It might be about social media. It might be about other competencies and traits that people need to be successful in that environment, and not just about learning more about, let's say, SEO. So it's this idea of, as you develop people, you grow both the depth and the breadth at the same time. With the idea of jobs changing, one of the things that we think about as well is what's going to be relevant in the future, and what are the jobs and types of skills that potentially AI will replace, and what are the types of things that will remain to be valid, important, and really helpful for us in the workplace. So if we think about that from the context of different jobs, we can see that there's a lot of data that tells us that over time, actually jobs that have a high degree of social skills remain really valid. So this data set is zeroed in on the 1980s, and it looks at what happened to jobs that have a combination of social and math, so sort of technical skills and social skills. And what's really interesting is that jump for high social and low math. So jobs that actually require supervisory skills, management skills, coaching skills, they've actually stayed really relevant and really important and have grown in value over time. So that, again, comes to the point around breadth and around developing different skills. And you can think of it as kind of different examples, but one useful example is think about a physician, think about a doctor. Actually, AI and machine learning will help the diagnosis piece to be much more accurate, much more early on in the process from where we are today. But what it's not going to replace is this idea of having a conversation with a patient, having a conversation with a family, coming up with a treatment plan. So that part, a machine is not going to be able to do. And so as we think about jobs, we also need to think about the competencies that are going to be sustainable in the long term. And just to end, as we think about careers, I think all of us sort of start by thinking about careers as like this idea of climbing the ladder, or kind of a Y, kind of you either go down the technical path or you go down the managerial path. But actually what we're seeing is much more towards the right in the future, which is this idea of, or this analogy of like rock climbing. You're kind of going from one job to another, informed by data, but actually jumping on and leveraging your skills to be able to do interesting tasks at work. What we're trying to do with this process is actually remove as much as we can the human element of it from an assessment perspective. So we use tools, we try to use the appropriate benchmarks, norm groups, things like that, to be able to say, when we're doing an assessment, actually it's not my opinion or your opinion or anybody else's opinion. This is kind of a more science-based approach to getting the data. Around the communication and change management piece, I think that's actually the advantage of going with this, because if we think about the piece around, kind of rock climbing and people owning their careers, actually if you give people more data and communicate that in a way, package that in a way that people have the choice to be able to do different things, actually that empowers people to be able to, kind of make those trade-offs. So we've actually had, a couple of examples where, say we run this as a project with 1,000 people, about 15% of the population will self-select out of doing future development work because they sort of see, actually, this is not for me. And that's okay if you package that the right way, communicate that right way, people are, go off and do something else that they're interested in. So the idea of communication is you want to keep people engaged, you want to sort of get their buy-in, support them as they make these transitions, but also help people self-select out if need be. Cool, well, thank you very much. I think the coffee's outside and I'll be outside to answer any questions. Thank you.